He thought he'd heard it all until Elon Musk's 5-year-old son asked a question no one at the dinner table could answer. What Donald Trump does next will break your heart and open your eyes. The dinner had ended almost an hour ago, but Donald Trump was still seated at the long polished table in the East Room. His dessert untouched, his glass of water, sweating quietly into a ring on the linen cloth. He wasn't sure why he was lingering. Maybe because the conversation had drained him, or maybe because something had happened, something small, but sharp, and it hadn't left him. He replayed it in his mind. There had been 10 people at the table: world leaders, tech billionaires, 2 retired generals, and one quietly fidgeting little boy who had arrived with Elon Musk, XAA-12, or just X, as everyone had started calling him, had been remarkably well behaved for a 5-year-old seated at a table full of grown-ups, talking in loops. He'd sat beside Elon, mostly silent, eating only the bread rolls and playing with a cloth napkin folded into an awkward swan. The boy had spoken only once, and that was what Trump couldn't stop thinking about. It had been in the middle of a heated discussion. Elon was explaining a new orbital relay system that would allow satellites to communicate faster, and a prime minister was arguing about cybersecurity risks. The words had layered thickly over one another, all logic and jargon and projection. Then, without warning, the boy had spoken. What happens when people die? The room had stilled, not violently, not even awkwardly, just paused. Every adult had looked at the child. Then they had done what adults do. They smiled politely. They shifted in their seats. They returned to the conversation like the question hadn't been asked. Trump had looked down the table at the boy now staring at his napkin, Swan, and felt something tug at him. Not the question itself, but the silence that followed it. Now sitting alone in the quiet of the White House dining room, Trump let out a long breath. He stood slowly, bones creaking with age and exhaustion, and stepped out into the hallway. An aide passed him, murmuring something about a call from South Dakota. Trump waved him off. Not now, he needed air. He moved through the halls with a familiarity that came only from living in a place both revered and feared. He passed portraits, chandeliers, windows that watched centuries go by, and then almost without thinking, he pushed open the glass doors to the south garden. The night air was cooler than expected. Fall had started to move. In soft and certain, he walked slowly along the path toward the old bench beneath the sycamore tree, and that's where he saw him, a small figure curled up alone. Trump stopped. It was X, still in his little blazer from dinner, still holding the same napkin, now wrinkled and limp. The boy was quiet, his eyes red, staring at the dark grass like it held answers. Trump approached slowly. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked gently. X looked up, startled, then shrugged. "I snuck out." Trump gave a soft smile. "I do that sometimes, too." He sat down on the far end of the bench, not too close. X didn't look at him. He was clutching the napkin like a blanket. "You asked a question at dinner," Trump said. After a moment, the boy nodded, eyes still down, and nobody answered another nod. "I'm sorry about that," Trump said. "I think you caught us all off guard." X finally looked up at him. "Do grown-ups not like those questions?" Trump tilted his head. "What do you mean about dying? And other stuff, people always get quiet like I did something wrong." Trump exhaled slowly. "You didn't do anything wrong. Then why do they look at me like that?" Trump searched for an answer, one that was honest, one that wouldn't scare a child. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "grown-ups are afraid of questions. They don't know how to answer." X frowned. "But they're grown-ups. Aren't they supposed to know?" Trump smiled, a sad one. "We like to think." "We do, but we're just older, not always wiser." The boy swung his feet a little. I asked my dad once, he said, people go back to the stars, but he said it fast, like he wanted to say something else. Trump nodded slowly. Maybe he didn't know how to say what he really felt. Do you know what happens when people die? Trump looked out over the garden. The moonlight touched everything gently. I've had people I love die, some suddenly, some slowly. I've stood by their beds. I've said goodbye when I wasn't ready. And you know what? I've learned. X leaned in just a little. I don't know what happens next, Trump said, but I think something does. Something. Kind. The boy was quiet. Then softly, what if they forget me? Trump turned to him. Who the people who died? What if they forget I love them? Trump swallowed hard. I don't think. Love works that way, he said. I think when we love someone, really love them, it stays even when they go, even if I forget their voice even then. X was quiet for a long time, then he whispered, I don't want to get big if it means I forget things. Trump felt something crack open inside him. He looked at this boy, not just Elon Musk's son, but a child with wonder and sorrow far too deep for 5 years of life. And he remembered being that small, that scared, that curious. He remembered asking his mother once, what happens when we disappear? She'd said, we don't disappear, we return to the one who made us. He hadn't thought about that in decades. Do you want to know what I think happens? Trump asked. X nodded. Trump pointed upward. You know stars die too, right? They go boom. X said exactly. But do you know what happens after they go? Boom. X shook his head. They leave behind light. It keeps traveling even after the star is gone. It moves through the dark. And sometimes someone sees it years later and says, look how bright that is. The boy blinked. People are like that too, Trump said. When someone dies, the love they gave, it keeps going, like light. X looked up at the sky, then back at Trump. Do you really believe that Trump hesitated? I think I do. Now, X smiled faintly. The wind rustled the trees. Trump stood slowly. Come on, let's get you back inside before the Secret Service thinks I've lost a world leader, kid. X giggled. Trump offered his hand. X took it. They walked back through the garden, the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet, and the silence between them no longer. Uncomfortable but full. Not all questions have answers, but sometimes asking them together is enough the next morning. Donald Trump awoke earlier than usual. The sun had barely broken past the horizon, casting a dull amber hue through the tall windows of the residence. The room was silent except for the quiet rustling of the city waking below. He had always been a light sleeper, but today it wasn't noise that stirred him. It was the boy's voice. Do you really believe that Trump sat up slowly? The sheets sliding down his arms he rubbed his face with. Both hands and sat still, for a while letting the memory roll over him. X's words, the way he had asked about death, the way his small fingers clutched that napkin like a tether to something safe had stayed in Trump's chest, like a stone that refused to shift. He walked to the window and stared out over the south lawn. It was calm, clean, still. Everything outside looked like it was under control. Everything inside him less so. He wasn't a man who welcomed discomfort. His instincts were sharp, his habits sharper. When something unnerved him, he usually out-talked it or moved faster than it could catch him. But this wasn't something he could outrun, not with meetings, not with cameras, not with applause. He dressed slowly, unusually, without the television on, no tie, no cufflinks, just a plain navy suit and a pale blue shirt open at the collar in the study downstairs. The coffee was waiting. So was the silence. He sat in the leather chair by the window, sipping slowly, the warmth of the mug doing little to soothe the chill running under his skin. I don't want to get big if it means I forget things. He didn't know why. That sentence hurt more than the others. Maybe because somewhere deep down he remembered saying something like it when he was young, or maybe he had only felt it and never dared say it aloud. He picked up the phone, considered dialing Elon, then put it down. What would he even say? Your son asked about death. He's scared, and he's wondering why you didn't answer. No, that wasn't a conversation you started on a Thursday morning. Instead, he opened the drawer beside his desk inside. A pile of letters, mostly unopened notes from supporters' children's drawings, occasionally a book from a pastor, a handwritten card from a veteran's widow. He picked one at random. It was from a woman in Tennessee, handwritten in neat, cursive, Mr. President, please don't forget us little people. We pray for you every night. I hope you know God's still listening. Sometimes I wonder if anyone in Washington still believes in that. He read it twice, then set it down. The boy's question had shaken him. Yes, but it wasn't just about death. It was about silence, the kind adults surround themselves with, because they think it protects them from vulnerability, because they think honesty makes them weak. And yet, wasn't it the child who had shown the most strength? He had asked the question no one else at that table dared to ask, not with their mouths anyway. Trump leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He saw the boy again, sitting beneath the sycamore tree, the moonlight making his small face almost glow. He remembered the way the boy had clung to his words, not because they were brilliant, but because they were spoken gently, truthfully. Even if I forget their voice, Trump thought of his older brother Fred. Fred had died decades ago, a slow, sad descent into alcohol and regret. A warning sign Trump had ignored until it was too late. He had grieved in his own way, but he hadn't really felt it for years now. Suddenly, he did. He remembered Fred's voice and how long it had been since he'd really let himself hear it. The knock at the door was soft. An aide, sir, Mr. Musk is on the grounds. He's in the Roosevelt room prepping for the Energy Round Table. Trump nodded. Bring him here when he's done. Just him. The aide blinked. Yes, sir. Trump stood and walked slowly to the window. Again, he watched the lawn, the reporters setting up outside the gates, the agents standing still like statues, and somewhere he hoped the boy was playing, asking more questions. An hour later, Elon Musk entered the study. He looked distracted as always, phone in hand, half composed, thoughts hanging on his face. But he paused when he saw Trump wasn't at his desk, but seated near the window. You asked to see me. Trump nodded toward the chair across from him. Sit. Elon sat curious. Something happened last night, Trump began. Elon raised an eyebrow. Your son asked a question at dinner. Elon nodded slowly. About death? You heard him? Of course. I just didn't know how to respond. Trump studied him, so you said nothing. Elon looked uncomfortable for the first time in a while. What do you say to a 5-year-old who asks, what happens when we die? He wouldn't understand. Trump leaned forward. He understood that you didn't answer Elon. Blinked, he told me. Trump continued that people look at him funny when he asks hard questions, that adults get quiet. Elon shifted in his seat. He's always been curious. That's not curiosity. That's loneliness. Silence. Trump exhaled slowly. Look, I'm not lecturing you. I've made more mistakes with my kids than I can count. I've drowned their silence with my voice. But last night, I saw a boy trying to understand something he's not supposed to face alone, and no one answered him. Elon looked genuinely rattled now. His eyes, usually sharp and distracted, were suddenly present. What did you say to him? Trump stared out the window. I told him, love is like light, that it keeps traveling even after we're gone. Elon looked down at his hands. Trump added, he listened and I listened back. And I think that's what he really wanted. Not answers, just someone who wasn't afraid to sit in. The not knowing, the room fell quiet. Trump looked back at Elon. We're raising sons in a world we barely understand anymore. They don't need us to be certain. They need us to be present. Elon nodded slowly, quietly. Trump. Stood, he's a good boy. Don't let the noise drown him. Elon stood too. I won't. Trump nodded. Once. Then turned back to the window. Elon left without another word, and Donald Trump stood there watching the morning roll on, thinking about all the children who ask big questions and all the adults who forget that not knowing is sometimes the most honest answer. Of all that evening, the White House was quieter than usual. There were no major speeches, no press briefings, just the sound of autumn wind brushing gently against the windows and the muffled footsteps of staff moving through the marble halls. Donald Trump sat alone in the small library, a rarely used space filled with antique volumes he had never bothered to read. A fire crackled softly. He wasn't reading. He was thinking for most of the day. The memory of X's question had circled in his mind like a hawk over still water, but now a second thought had begun to stir beneath it. One that had crept in uninvited. When was the last time I asked Barron a real question? Not a casual one, not a polite one, a real one. He had no answer. It unsettled him, more than he cared to admit. He stood slowly, bone stiff, from sitting too long and made his way upstairs. The residence felt different at night, less official, more like a space where truths could exist without press releases outside Barron's room. He paused. The door was cracked open. A soft light spilled into the hall. He knocked gently, no response. He pushed the door open. Barron was at his desk. Headphones. In staring at a tablet screen, he looked taller than Trump remembered, more like a young man than a boy. His posture was slouched but focused. His room was neat, too neat, as if silence had taken up permanent residence there. Trump cleared his throat. Barron looked up startled and tugged the headphones down. "Hey," he said, a little wary. "Hey," Trump replied, stepping in. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you." Barron shrugged. "It's fine." Trump looked around. "You're always in here. I like it. It's quiet." Trump nodded, then walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. Barron turned in his chair, watching him. "I met someone yesterday." Trump said. Elon's son Barron raised an eyebrow. "X? Yeah, he's 5. Asked a question at dinner about death." Barron blinked. "Whoa." Trump nodded. No one answered him. Barron leaned back slightly. "What did you do?" "I found him. Later sat with him. Told him what I believed, or what I think I believed." Barron didn't speak. Trump took a deep breath. "It made me realize something." "Don't know if I've ever talked to you about things like that." Barron shrugged. "We don't really talk like that." Trump winced. "No, we don't?" They sat in awkward quiet. Then Trump asked carefully, "Do you ever think about that stuff?" Barron looked away. "Sometimes. What do you believe?" Barron hesitated. "I think people are scared of being forgotten. That's the worst part, not the dying. Just being gone and no one remembering what you were like." Trump swallowed. "I think I felt that when my brother died," he said quietly. "Fred, he was funny. Kinda used to bring me candy. After school and after he was gone, I couldn't remember his laugh for years. I buried it. I think I was scared of the hurt." Barron studied him. "I didn't know that." He said. "I've never said it." Trump admitted. They were quiet again. Then Barron asked, "Do you ever get scared?" Trump gave a faint smile. "Every day." Of what? Trump looked out the window. "Of letting people down, of wasting time, of talking so much that I forget to hear what matters, of missing the important stuff because I thought the world was about being right instead of being real." Barron nodded slowly. "That's a lot." "It is," Trump agreed. They sat for another few minutes, the sounds of the house soft and distant. Then Barron said, "I used to have this question, but I stopped asking it." Trump looked at him. "Why?" "Because I didn't think anyone would want to answer." Trump leaned forward. "Try me." Barron took a breath. "What if I grow up and I'm nothing like you? What if I don't want to do speeches or stand in front of cameras? What if I want a quiet life and I just disappear from all of this? Trump's chest tightened. He stood, walked over and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Then I'll find you, he said softly. Wherever you go, I'll find you, and I'll listen to whatever you want to say. Barron looked up, eyes wet. You promise? Trump nodded. I promise. They sat there for a long time, father and son, neither trying to fix anything, just being present in the unspoken space between their truths. Later that night, Trump wrote a short note and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. Sometimes the question is more important than the answer, and the person who dares to ask it is braver than the one who pretends to know. The day after his conversation with Baron Donald Trump found himself doing something he hadn't done in decades. He took a morning off. No cameras, no meetings, no press releases, just a car waiting outside the West Wing. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, not even his aides. He simply said, I'll be back by lunch, and stepped into the back seat of the black SUV, leaving behind a stack of unsigned papers and unanswered calls. As the car pulled away, he gave the driver an address he hadn't spoken aloud in years: Queens, his childhood neighborhood. The streets were different now. Of course, the diner's gone. The storefronts changed, the sidewalks, cleaner but quieter. Still, the memory of them lived in the bones of the place, and Trump felt it all rising up. The deeper they drove into the borough, they stopped in front of a small church. White siding, peeling paint. A short flight of steps leading to a red door. He hadn't been inside it since his mother's funeral. He didn't even know if it was open anymore, but he stepped out, hands in the pockets of his coat, and walked slowly to the door. To his surprise, it opened with a soft creak. The sanctuary inside was empty. Dust hung like mist in the slanted light from the windows. The wooden pews creaked under his weight as he sat near the back. He hadn't come to pray, not exactly, but he needed to be in a place that remembered him. He closed his eyes. Fred, his mother, the small allness of his world, before it expanded, before towers and spotlights and microphones, before the weight. He remembered sitting in this very pew as a boy, legs swinging, bored by sermons but fascinated by stained glass. He remembered whispering questions to his mother when the pastor spoke of heaven. Where is it? He had asked. She had smiled, touched his hair. Closer than we think. He didn't understand then, but now, all these years later, he wondered if she had meant that heaven wasn't somewhere far above, but right here in the small, quiet acts of love and truth and presence, like sitting beside a boy who asked about death, like answering your son when he says, "What if I don't want to be like you?" He sat there for a long time. Then from the far corner of the sanctuary came the sound of slow footsteps. He turned. An old woman, thin and upright, stepped into the light. "Mr. Trump?" she asked gently. He stood. "You know me?" She smiled. "I was your Sunday school teacher, long ago." He blinked. Her name rushed back to him. "Mrs. Carnes," she nodded. "You had a lot of questions back then. Always wanted to know more than what we had time for." He chuckled softly. "Still do." She walked down the aisle, her steps careful. "What brings you back?" she asked. He paused. "A little boy asked me, what happens when people die?" She didn't speak. I tried to give him an answer, he said, but it made me realize how much I've stopped asking questions. Of my own, Mrs. Carnes sat in the pew across from him. "There's wisdom in answers," she said, "but there's more in the questions we keep asking even when we're older." He nodded. "I thought I had to know everything," he admitted, "to lead, to protect, to never show doubt." She reached over, placed her wrinkled hand over his, and now he looked down. "Now I think maybe the bravest thing I can do is say, I don't know, but I'm here, and I'm listening." Mrs. Kern smiled. Your mother would be proud of that. He swallowed hard. They sat together in the quiet for a while, letting the weight of unspoken things settle around them. Eventually, he stood. I should go. They'll wonder where I am. Mrs. Carnes nodded. You'll come back. I think I will. As he stepped outside, the autumn wind met him. Like an old friend, he didn't feel younger, but he felt lighter, like a piece of himself had been waiting here all this time. He returned to the White House by noon as promised, and before doing anything else, he asked Barron if he wanted to take a walk just. The two of them, they wandered the garden paths, slowly not talking much, until Barron suddenly asked, Do you think people go to heaven? Trump smiled gently. I don't know, he said, but I think the love we give gets there, even if we don't. Barron nodded. I like that. So to Trump that night, he placed a small frame quote on his desk. It was scribbled in pencil, in his own handwriting. The most important people are the ones who aren't afraid to ask what no one else will. 3 days later, the White House was unusually still, not because of anything external, no national emergency, no breaking news, but because something inside Donald Trump had changed. And though few people noticed at first, those closest to him began to sense it. In subtle ways, he listened longer. He spoke more slowly, and for the first time in years he asked questions. He didn't try to answer on the fourth day. Elon Musk returned to Washington for the final round of energy and tech consultations. His son was with him again. Trump saw them in the East Wing corridor, Elon brisk and sharp as always, and X, a few steps behind, staring up at the chandeliers. Mr. President, Elon said. Trump smiled. Elon? He crouched slightly to meet the boy's eyes. And how's my favorite philosopher? X smiled shyly. I didn't ask any big questions today. Trump chuckled. Maybe that's because you're still waiting for an answer. Elon watched the exchange carefully. I'll be in the Roosevelt room, he said to Trump. He can stay with you if you like. Trump nodded. I'd like that. They made their way to the garden. The same bench, the same soft breeze. Only now the leaves were deeper gold, and the silence between them had turned from awkward to familiar. Trump glanced at X. You know you've been on my mind a lot this week. X looked up because I asked that thing exactly, that X played with a leaf in his hands. Did you find out the answer? Trump smiled. Not exactly, but I found something else. What that asking the question and not running from it is a kind of strength. Even when you're little, X nodded thoughtfully. Trump continued. I talked to my son after we spoke and I told him about you, about how your question helped me remember things I forgot, like what Trump looked up at the sky, like how it's okay to not know how love keeps going, even when people don't, and how listening, really listening, is sometimes the best answer we can give. X was quiet. Then he said, I'm glad I said it out loud. Trump nodded. Me too. X turned to him. Do you think other grown-ups are scared too? Trump looked at the boy. I think most grown-ups are scared, but they hide it, some behind jobs, some behind anger, some behind being too busy. X looked down. My daddy's always busy. Trump's voice softened. So was I for a long time. Do you think he loves me? Trump placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. I know he does. But sometimes love gets buried under all the things adults think they have to do. Doesn't mean it's not there. X's eyes glistened. Trump continued. You asking that question? It reminded me that being strong doesn't mean pretending. It means caring enough to be honest even when it's hard. A quiet passed between them. Then Trump asked, Can I ask you something now? X nodded. What do you think happens when people die? X thought for a long moment, then said, I think they go somewhere good, but it's quiet and soft and no one's in a hurry. Trump smiled. That sounds like heaven to me. The boy leaned against him slightly. I hope I go there, but not for a long time. Trump looked at him gently. You will one day, but you've got a lot of living to do first and a lot of questions left to ask. X smiled from the edge of the garden. An aide called, softly, Mr. President, Mr. Musk is ready. Trump nodded, then looked at the boy. Go on. He said, your dad's waiting. X stood. Then, suddenly he turned back and hugged Trump's waist tightly. Thank you for not being scared. Trump's eyes stung. He placed a hand on the boy's back. Thank you for being brave enough to ask. The boy ran off. Trump watched him go, the wind lifting leaves around his feet like quiet applause. Later that night, alone in his study, he opened a notebook, not one filled with strategies or speeches. Just a single page he wrote, sometimes a child's question is the echo of a truth we buried too long ago, and sometimes the answer is not in knowing, but in sitting beside them, unafraid. He closed the book. Outside, the stars had begun to appear, and Donald Trump, for the first time in years, sat in their presence with no need to be anything more than human.